All right, what is going on, guys? Got another breakdown for UFC 276. Another awesome prelim matchup at welterweight. Got Ian Garry taking on Gabe Green. Garry, very hyped prospect out of Ireland, training out of Sanford MMA, but he's gonna have a 4-inch reach advantage in this one. He's an inch taller. I will start with Gabe Green though. So riding a two-fight winning streak, solid two-fight winning streak. Wins a unanimous decision against Phil Rowe. Banks the first two rounds. Just a little bit better on the ground, I would say. Better in scrambles, and I would say landing the heavier shots to a point. That fight was a lot closer than I remember it being. I feel like when I watched it for the first time, I thought pretty clear for Philip Rowe. Excuse me, for Gabe Green, but watching it again for this tape study, it was a very close fight. And I think Phil Rowe is very good. I think he's coming into his own. He's got some holes in his game, some things he's got to clean up, but very talented fighter. So it's a good win. And then he picks up the win over Johan Linus. Linus only one round of cardio, man. That's something I've learned over the years because he is from CFFC. So yeah, that's a good win. He did get hurt in that one. He got dropped momentarily, and he did get taken down, but he ends up bouncing back, getting the second round knockout. Again, no cardio for Linus, but it was a good bounce back win because it didn't look good for Gabe Green for a second. But his UFC debut, man, very impressive performance against Daniel Rodriguez. He kind of gets pieced up in the first two rounds. Responds really well in the third round, though. He's got a very, very good chin. He was eating a lot of Rodriguez's best shots. He was standing in there in the pocket, trading good boxing combinations. And yeah, coming into the UFC, very good resume, honestly. Not necessarily in terms of the names, but good records. Usually with the guys he beats, beat Leon Shabazian, but he's fought with Bellator, fought with Combate, CXF. So very well traveled, some reputable promotions there. In terms of style, he's pretty well rounded. He's got very good hooks. He's very good in close. A lot of power. Good low kicks. And then on the ground, very good on the ground too. Good wrestling, good cardio. He can chain wrestle, though he has been leaning on the striking in his last few fights, which I don't necessarily love. But I'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, very well rounded sub game. He's got a few submission wins in his career, and he can threaten all different types of subs. He's not limited to just like a rear naked choke. He's got triangles. He's got Kimuras. He will threaten different submissions. And again, good cardio. He sometimes finds himself in bad positions on the ground, but he never seems to stay in a super bad position very long. And he is pretty good at getting out of those really bad positions and at least making them, a little bit less bad. But yeah, all around, I think that Gabe Green is pretty solid, a little bit underrated. He just kind of lacks that signature win, which he could get here. Um, Gary's definitely going to have the speed advantage, but what I really like about Gabe Green is he can definitely brawl. He seems to respond well to adversity. Like in most of his fights where he gets clipped or when he's getting combinations just strung together against him, he just starts brawling. He gets in there, and that could be very dangerous against Ian Garry, at least where he's at right now in his career. But for Ian Garry, like I was saying earlier, very, very hyped prospect coming out of Ireland. So the UFC has a lot of interest in promoting him. And he comes in polished. He's from that new era where he's not just coming from a discipline. He's not just like a jiu-jitsu guy who got into UFC. Like from a young age, he's just been training all disciplines. This is gonna be his 10th pro fight, but he does have some amateur fights as well. He's got a pretty good extensive amateur record. So it feels like he has a lot more fights than he has on his record, and that's because he basically has. So there's been hype on him for a while, and when you look at Ian Garry, man, you see exactly why, just beyond the promotional aspects, which he leans into fairly well. We'll talk about that. That's like honestly a big factor in where I went with this fight. But yeah, stylistically, man, Ian Garry, he doesn't really have any weaknesses. Hasn't really had to show his ground game in the UFC yet, but it's really good. You go back and watch his Cage Warriors fights against Jack Grant. Very crafty fighter, tough to put away, very dangerous on the ground. Grant really gave Garry a very good test on the ground, and if you ever want to see what you're dealing with Ian Garry's ground game, it's pretty good. You can go watch that Jack Grant fight. He even did threaten some submissions himself there, stayed out of danger. And again, it's that experience that shows with Garry. He's been training to be an MMA fighter basically his whole life. So yeah, it definitely shows, but he's very big for welterweight. He's got a huge frame, very rangy striker, great movement, and just very straight punches and kicks. He's training out of Sanford MMA, so you know he's going to be polished. And yeah, man, long term, I could see Ian Garry being very, very, very good. Like all the tools are there. UFC though, honestly, he hasn't looked all that impressive. At least with where the hype is and with where he kind of sees himself at this point. He's very, very confident, but he might be a little overconfident. He does say and do some stupid things, like not like bad things, but just a little bit. So many Irish fighters have this problem, man, where they just try to like mimic McGregor's speaking style almost. And Ian Garry, you can tell, just thinks that he's gonna be like so good. And he had a great post fight speech after he got that win in the Garden against Jordan Williams. But in the second fight, man, it was just like it was kind of cringe just listening to him like kind of like ramble on. And I worry about him looking past Gabe Green, but I feel like we've talked about a lot of intangibles with Ian Garry. In his last two fights against Jordan Williams, no longer with the promotion, he doesn't look good at first. He gets cracked with some. He gets cracked with a head kick. He gets cracked with a big overhand. His nose is bloody. And, like I said, Jordan Williams no longer with the promotion, but the scouting report on him is he's just going to throw bombs, and usually he gets knocked out, but he will throw some bombs before he does, and that's what he did. He made it a little bit scary, but Ian Garry, beautifully timed counter, just draws him right into his power. Very straight right hand, puts him to sleep right at the buzzer in the first round. Great win for Ian Garry there, but then against Darian Weeks, man, not the most impressive performance. Like he comes in as like a 4-1 favorite, and honestly loses the first round. Just kind of struggles to get going. Darian Weeks doesn't have a lot of dynamic tools in his striking game. Man, he just tries to kind of march forward and land power. And Ian Garry kind of took a minute to download that. Once he did, again, the striking is so good with Ian Garry. You look long term and where he should be. He's just got laser accurate punches, very good kicks. He sets things up well, but it just took him a little bit, and it looked a lot closer than it should have been. I thought rounds 2 and 3 were pretty clear for Garry after dropping the first round, or maybe dropping the first round. It's not like he got blown out, but it's just again you're coming in as a -400 favorite. The UFC clearly wants to promote you. They give you Jordan Williams, who's on his way out the door, who is 9-6 as a pro after that loss. They give you Darian Weeks, who's 5-1, and like you should just be crushing these cans. And Ian Garry has just been making it look a little bit scary, but mentally you would think that he's Conor McGregor already. And I think that that is a huge problem against Gabe Green. Talking about a guy who can brawl. And, for this fight, man, I'm going to go with Gabe Green. And he's like a plus 140 favorite now. And it's about the same on DK I looked. So I'd like to see it widen a little bit. I could see the money coming in on Ian Garry. I think pretty much everybody's on Ian Garry in this fight. But this is one of those, man, where I look at it and I initially lean Ian Garry. But then if I start doing the tape study and there's just things that I can't look past, and I start swinging towards the other way, I usually can't ignore that. And it's two things. One, the whole mental aspect, man. Listen, like I've been speaking very highly about Ian Garry in this fight. I mean, in this video, because he has a lot of potential. But at the same time, I feel like he could use a growth fight or an ego check. A loss might not be the worst thing in the world for him right now. I know that sounds stupid, but you gotta stop doing what every Irish fighter does and just try to be Conor McGregor, man. Just you gotta be your own guy. That's always gonna be there if you're any good. But like, it's just you see it all the time, man. Like, there's been multiple guys where this has happened. Like, post McGregor Irish fighters coming up, they get way too big of an ego way too fast, and they stop focusing on what's in front of them. And what's in front of them is a guy who can brawl, man. And that leads me into the stylistic thing. I feel like Ian Garry just kind of leans on he. First of all, he needs to be in a rhythm. He's very technical, and if you're somebody who can one stop his movement or just bully your way in close, he was allowing himself to get backed up by Darian Weeks, and Gabe Green is going to throw more. And I just feel like if Ian Garry lands his best shot and it doesn't put Gabe Green away, which it might, again, man, I could see Ian Garry just saying, wow, all right, there he is. Like, all these questions I have about him right now will just be answered right there if he knocks out Gabe Green. That'd be awesome. But um, I just think that Gabe Green has the style to beat him. He's pretty good everywhere. I think Ian Garry is a little bit better than him anywhere also, but Gabe Green just kind of lacks that big win. I like what I saw against Daniel Rodriguez, just brawling. And Daniel Rodriguez is a brawler himself. He puts on a pace. Ian Garry just kind of like moves laterally and tries to set up these great shots. Don't get me wrong, he does. He has a great jab. He has a great front kick to the head and body that he will score points with. But Gabe Green also has very heavy low kicks. He lands a couple of those. He takes the movement away. But most importantly, I think he's going to take advantage of when he does get Ian Garry up against the fence. And I do think if Ian Garry starts to tag him, Gabe Green's not going to make it that easy, man. We saw that against Daniel Rodriguez. I mean, it's possible that Ian Garry just puts him away with a perfectly timed counter again. It's very possible. He could just be next level already. I think he'll get there, but I think this is going to be a growth fight, man. I think Gabe Green is dangerous. I worry about Ian Garry looking past him. We got the plus odds for Gabe Green. And I just like his ability to take a punch, brawl, and just make it ugly, man. That's the way to beat Ian Garry. I feel like they're going to recognize that. And yeah, I'm taking a stab on Gabe Green here. So thanks for watching, guys. Sure, subscribe and take it easy.